The major TV trade publications ran stories in late August covering the WCW press conference that announced Monday Nitro. We'll get to some Bischoff quotes in a moment, but first I want to ask something, Tony, I've wanted to know for a long time. There's three wrestlers who appear at this press conference, Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, and Sting being the three, and they're there in their full wrestling garb. We mentioned earlier that Steve McMichael is here too. Tony, where the hell's Ric Flair? Why is Ric Flair not amongst those chosen to represent WCW at this time? This feels like one of the first of many public slights that Bischoff would have to Flair. Am I wrong?
No, it came across that way. I don't know. Flair may have been, I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. You know Flair as well as I do, probably better. What did he say about it?
Well, I'm sure at the time he was slighted, but now he's like, in hindsight, he'd rather not be there. He'd rather be hanging out. He'd rather not be working, doing this.
Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't. And the things like that, although are important to the company, the guys really, their time is their time. A perfect example is, and I'm thinking this is 1994, the year before Luger came back to WCW. He worked an event. He worked the Survivor Series. And I don't know where the Survivor Series was that night, but I remember watching the Survivor Series. We were back here in Atlanta and watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade the next day, and he was on a freaking float. And I remember thinking, I bet he is pissed off, man. Because to be on one of those floats, you got to get up early,
right?
And so I'm sure they brought him in on a private plane right after the event, put him up in a hotel in New York. He had not much sleep at all, and there he was waving everybody on the float. And I remember thinking at that time, again, he's probably pissed off. So, you're right. Flair was slighted. I don't know the reasoning behind that. It may have been. Well, you obviously are going to have Hogan there.
Sure.
You're obviously going to have Macho Man Randy Savage there because they got a lot of exposure with the WWF.
And they're in New York.
Sting, colorful, full regalia. That always draws a crowd or would get a shot or two on TV.
What's wrong with the fourth one being Flair?
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. It should be. Because he is one of the big stars in the industry.
At the press conference, Bischoff says, quote, why did I want to go up against the competition? Because I like kicking butt.
Yeah.
Tony, is there a more Bischoff quote from this time than that?
No, there's not. That's Eric. Eric was very aggressive. Eric wanted, and I was mentioned on earlier podcasts, Eric wanted to kick WWE's ass. He wanted to do that. That was what he wanted to be remembered for. And he was very aggressive about that. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that at all. I don't think. But that was Eric.
Bischoff somewhat acknowledges at this press conference that WCW doesn't expect to beat Raw's ratings right away. And he says, quote, at the end of 3 years, I'll be standing alone. The first month, I realize I'm going against a product that has been well branded, and I don't expect to take over immediately. No great war has ever been won without a long battle. How prophetic that would be in hindsight.
Wow. I like the terms war, takeover, battle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just setting the stage, right?
Absolutely, it does.
That's basically declaring war. I mean, you could have had a boss come in and say, they're going to do their thing. I think we're going to do our thing, and I think we'll be successful. But he used those words directed right at Vince. Very prophetic.
Prior to this, Bischoff had been seemingly more focused on trying to get WCW out of the red. And I think a lot of fans forget that WCW has yet to turn a profit the entire time Turner owned it. So Bischoff was canceling money-losing ideas, including a lot of house shows, and he was instead finding more economical ways to save money and get some crossover appeal, like the long tapings that they did at Disney. Wrestling fans didn't necessarily like that, and now they say, I hated that, but flying in over the mouse ears, really mattered in the industry, the television industry, and it was a cost-cutting measure. because they had the studio. They could do so much at one time. But at this press conference, it seems like it's a little bit of a departure, and it's the first time we start to hear Bischoff's obsession with beating the WWF, essentially becoming judged more on the ratings than anything else. Is that fair to say you feel like Nitro is, the first time that the obsession really switched from trying to be more profitable and draw more money, and now it's more about drawing a bigger rating?
Well, I think they're hand in hand, aren't they? If you draw a bigger rating, you're gonna make more profits.
In theory.
In theory, it is. And I think you're seeing us becoming less of a wrestling company and more of a television company.
There you go.
At that time.
And that's what I really want to talk about, because so many fans, just automatically talk about ratings during this era, but that's not the only indicator. It's representative of ad revenue. That's the reason ratings matter. Potential advertisers want to know what the ratings are. And so, with that in mind, if you know that that's just one of the metrics, it doesn't replace licensing. It doesn't replace merchandise. It doesn't replace, ticket sales. It doesn't replace pay-per-view buy rates, et cetera, et cetera. It's just one of the many. But it seems like from here on out, at least from my worldview, it becomes what Bischoff is hell-bent on. And I love details like this, Tony. WCW holds this press conference to announce the debut of Nitro in New York City. And, of course, one of the reasons is New York is America's largest media market. But doesn't it have something to do, in your opinion, that this is in Vince's backyard when they do it?
Yeah, to me, that was the whole reason to have it in New York. I mean, logically, you'd have it in Atlanta, wouldn't you? Because that's where you're based out of.
Or Charlotte.
Broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
But you have it in New York. Back in the day, when I first started in wrestling, here's where the things were talked about. Going to work in the Carolinas, that meant you went to work for the Crockett's.
Right.
Going to Florida meant you went
for Graham.
For the Grahams, right. Working for Gandhi meant you worked out in Minnesota.
Yep.
But when you said, I'm going to work for New York.
It's McMahon.
It was McMahon. You called it New York. That was the indicator with the boys, we're going to New York. Flair even did a great local promo one time. I don't know where it aired on. You may have seen it. Flair said, people have been trying to get out of New York forever. I'm trying to get in. And that was back when he was working with Junkyard Dog and pretty pissed off about his life. And so it was called New York back then. And that's why it was there. It was there because of Vince McMahon. Not necessarily because it was the television capital of the world. I mean, you could have done it in Los Angeles, really. But that was the reason it was done.
And a very Bischoff note here. Do you remember the venue where this press conference happened?
I don't remember the venue.
The Harley-Davidson Cafe. Does this write itself or what? That's awesome. The TV trades indicate that TNT is going to be selling ads based on drawing a 2.0 rating, but they suggest that will include the replay. So it's actually a pretty realistic and achievable goal by everyone's estimation when you combine the two.
Yeah, another reason for the replay, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably a bigger reason than anything else.